How you gonna walk through this world? It's so easy to misstep. How are you gonna walk through the world? So easy to screw it up. You gotta rise like the sun does every day. Rise up, look above. The light feels something like love. Hello friends, I'm Shelley Leedahl, a multi-genre writer in lovely Ladysmith on Vancouver Island, and this is Season 3 of my literary podcast, Something Like Love. I've always been wild about exploring, so I'm feeling the pain during these restrictive pandemic times, and thus am dedicating Season 3 to travel and exploration. You're warmly invited to join me each week on international adventures via my poetry, fiction, and essays. I'll share some Canadian locales too. I also promote other writers' work, and because I just can't help myself, I add a dash of music to the mix as well. No passports required, no quarantine necessary. You don't even need to buckle in. Let's just do this. Sometimes you write something, and it sits in a drawer or in a file on your computer for years, decades, maybe forever. That's been the case with the 6 postcard stories I'll share today, each set in Mérida on Mexico's Yucatán Peninsula. I was in this colonial city with 9 other Canadian artists and 10 Mexican artists, equal parts writers and photographers, for a month in 2002 as part of an exchange, an intercambio. A year after, in 2003, the Mexican artists came Canada way, and we spent 6 weeks together on our individual projects and collaborations at the Bounce Center. I hold these 2 experiences close to my heart, not only for the art that was created through them, but also because of the enduring connections they've spawned. Mérida, a city of about 1 million, is known for its rich Mayan history and Mayan culture and traditions, including food and reenactments of the Mayan ballgame, continue in the city. We arrived just after Hurricane Isidore had devastated the area. It was bad. There were deaths, and 500,000 Yucatecans were left homeless. The graceful city I had toured many times via the internet was not the city I arrived in. Yet, as I piled into a taxi with a few other Canadians, I had the distinct sense that for the first time in my 39 years, I was home. And I got a visceral sense of the city's passionate heartbeat. People danced in the streets. Hell, I danced in the streets. Mérida was clowns with colossal balloon bouquets, horse-drawn carriages, soldiers on parade, lovers on park benches, screaming ambulances, little girls primped up like princesses, road repair crews, girls in tartan skirts, blouses white and crisp as sails, Spanish-speaking Mennonites selling cheese, shoe shiners, street musicians, salsa dancers, sprawling markets. Newspapers and sweets were sold on street corners, vendors pitched hamacas, fans, Panama hats. Bats as big as pigeons swooped between the trees in the plazas. Mayan women in traditional white dresses with elaborately embroidered flowers at the neck and hem were everywhere. There was live outdoor theater. There was magic. But let's go back to those benches. I was struck by the city's unique S-shaped benches called confidantes, or de los enamorados, for those in love. The chairs seat two people, they're binary and are usually painted white, and they're connected by their handles on opposite sides, so when you sit down, you're facing the other person. On the YucatanToday.com website, I learned that a popular local legend exists about a father who had a daughter he adored, and the girl was being courted by a young man of the village. The father, jealous, asked them as a condition of their courtship that they only venture as far as the benches in the park. They accepted, but the father then realized that the traditional park bench gave them plenty of opportunity to be physically close to each other, so he decided to create the Sia Tu Io, the chair, you and I, which allowed them to speak to each other and look into each other's eyes while always maintaining a discreet distance. On these confidentes and on regular park benches throughout the city, I was amazed at how passionate couples of all ages were with each other. Hugging, kissing, stroking, well, you get the picture. As a rule, you don't see this in Canada. I teamed up with the Mexican photographer Gerardo Montiel Clint for a project. I asked Gerardo to help me interview and photograph 6 of these amorous couples. All I wanted to know was their first names and occupations, and I would construct a fictional story for each of them. All these years later, I'm going to share those very short stories now. If you wish to see the photos that accompany the stories, you'll find them on my Facebook page. Are you ready? Vámonos! Marcos Anselmi, because he played guitar. Her mother would not think it much to begin from, but had she not purchased their casa on account of the window that opened to morning glories? Did she not buy a dress in the market last Saturday because of a single opal button? Well then, her mother knew something about it. Papa was another matter. She would brace herself against his artillery of questions, but would never reveal the truth. They had met on the internet, had been making plans and a certain kind of love on separate screens for the last 3 months. If only her father, for un momentito, could see the world through rainbows instead of rain. There, in that room, a simple table, 2 chairs, 3 pitahaya, a hammock, his shirt and her blouse making a soft, arm-in-arm pile on the floor. The moon claimed each square as her own, and Zelmi quickly forgot the scream she had swallowed, the shock of blood, ruined underwear rolled into a ball and stuffed inside her purse between contraband lipstick and bus fare. It was the time for music. Gold light glanced off his right hand as he softly plucked strings, the fingertips of his left hand riding frets as they had, minutes before, played her spine. That was their 3rd hour together. In the first, they'd met in the parque across from the cathedral. In the second, besos y abrazos along the length of the bench. Then his tiny room at the back of a store stocked with clay bowls and postcards curled by humidity. The city beyond her father's iron gate was not the zona peligrosa he would have her believe. It was not rigged with landmines, no gunfire, after all. Oh no, her father had had it all wrong. Beyond the tan suits of security guards, she'd found the A minor chord, the acoustics of moonlight, his hair standing as though her fingers were still inside it. Because he played guitar. And when he sang, he was a little boy in a white gown in the 3rd row of the choir. Because of the way he cried her name. Victor and Anna. He wears a white shirt, and the hands at the ends of his sleeves draw thin light from the window where the curtains do not reach. He selects another photograph and arranges it against a black drop. His hands, rare creatures that crawled from the sea to find this dark hour in a tranquil room and perform for her. She dares to lean closer on the offered chair. It is her mother's errand, to have the family's individual ancestral photos shot together for reasons Anna neither knows nor cares about. This is her second visit to the studio. The first time he had been too busy to accept her, and she had walked home, weightless, through a sudden rain. This time she had rushed directly from school, still in her plaid skirt, white blouse, sleeves pushed past her elbows, socks gleaming around ankles and inside her black shoes. She has not seen him smile. He might be the age of her youngest uncle, much older, in any case, than her 15 years. She is aware of her breath, her chest rising as he adjusts a photo of her great-grandparents, 2 wooden figures, arms not quite touching, the lines of their mouths held in a way that suggested what they knew about pain. She wishes she could breathe life into them and not be embarrassed about sharing their blood. He views the photographs through his camera's solitary eye, so still here, so unlike the rooms of her house, little brothers knocking into walls and each other, accidents of flowers and glass upon the tiled floor. But this, she follows the meticulous movements of his fingertips on the borders of the second grim photo. His silent step back, forward, another minor adjustment. If she has to stand, she'll falter. If called to speak, she'll find herself mute. She fears it is all an invention. Even exhaling will shatter the spell. But how to steady her knees, blot the weather that has collected in the corners of her eyes? Ahora, time could end. Too soon? He's done, and gathering the photos to return them to the envelope that has slipped off her lap. He kneels to retrieve it, and the mechanics of her chest come loose. His head so close to her leg. She lifts his empty hand, introduces his 3rd and 4th fingers to her mouth. It's the small things that survive. When she is to her granddaughters as hideous and deathlike as her photographed ancestors now appear to her, she'll recall the copper taste of his ring as it caught against her teeth, how slowly he pulled away. Julio and Leedahl. Of course it will end badly. There, in the shadow of the cathedral, she attempts to warn him between the 1st and 3rd kiss of the vitriolic ending they will make. Months will go missing. A rosary of implosions inside the small cave of his chest. And after the impossible noise and color of it all, the phantom smells of each other's clothes no longer flung against the corners of sepia rooms, only this, the hush of crumpled tissues falling from sheets, the shrine of wet carnations circling dead and distant beds. Then there'll be no more. He covers her words with his mouth, and soon the bells call for Mass, and they run into the rain laughing and without a destination. Leedahl claims his smaller hand between hers, marveling briefly at the shapes and textures of hands she has already known and left. Julio's fingers are tapered like altar candles, no bigger than a child's. She will make an easy meal of him. She loses faces, names, the sounds they make between the shores of her thighs, but the hands never go away. Moments from now, they will find a passage between abandoned buildings, and he will run his index finger beneath the collar of her new white blouse. Jose and Carmen. Between the three of them, they had 2 bottles of wine and a good watch with a broken strap that Nacho had pinched from his grandfather's dresser. They stood outside the Estetica, unable to see past papered windows. Who would be first? There was some friendly argument. They had come a long way for the second time that afternoon, both times without the music of money in their pockets, but now there was this, the watch, the wine, enough for something. They were giggling and pushing each other toward the door. "It's your stuff, you first," Paco said, his hands on Nacho's narrow shoulders. The chica in the doorway saw them, then glanced briefly away. 2 fingers tested the pulse below her ear. A bare, soiled foot rested against the ankle of the other. She had gray eyes, like a wolf. The top buttons of her dress were unfastened, a simple green smock that may have once fit, but the fabric now loosened around her. Jose couldn't say if she was sad or lovely. Her collarbones were close to her skin. "Ven aquí." Jose and Paco became statues. Nacho approached her waiting hand. The blue door closed without sound. The boys sat on the curb and pitched pebbles into the street. Shadows rose like sculptures above and between them. A cab floated past. There was nothing to say. Nacho returned. One thumb hooked through a belt loop, a dark wave of the hair his mother still loved to touch had fallen across his eyes. Already they could see he was different. "Ella tomará uno más." She'll take one more. Jose remembers that she was nice, that she told him her name and he didn't hear it, that she said she only let the young ones kiss her. She took more time with him because he was ashamed when his pants came down and he stumbled toward her, palms out like the blind. After, he would turn it all over inside himself, search the maps of his hands for answers. He had done this in the absence of love, and he would do it again. It was a long ago time, measured in hurricanes and grandchildren, but his wife brought it back just now on the park bench, with day becoming night, in the moment she turned from him, touched his memory beneath her ear. Danielson and Lillian. And then they had a moment alone. But what could they do with it? There was the deep weight of heat, raucous children chasing pigeons into the blue, old men willing themselves from bench to bench in crushed black shoes, the church of broken windows, small clusters of trees where other couples took the shade, a bag of buns from the panaderia. 3 weeks now, and every day a length of sisal pulled more tautly around her neck. How his arms wore sleeves, how his thighs might feel if she were to reach out in this moment, in the daylight, and squeeze him just above the knees. The cigarillos he held between his lips. His life was etched into his face like a language few people knew. Old enough to be her father, yes, but she soon got over that. She imagined a room in which to contain it. Burgundy walls, obscure paintings. This man patronized galleries and fine things. He could find reason in any artist's work. He knew the globe and 7 languages. Why was he now next to her, their arms brushing as if by chance? ¿Cómo te sientes? Every quarter hour he asked how she was feeling, as if she could possibly conjure the syllables necessary to explain. Anything she uttered was common, trivial, a poor reflection of who she knew she was. When he began with questions, always by the third she had no more to say. A plum in her throat, skin to dust. She desired to tell him, I am the colors night makes me feel, to say, 2 can play your game. There had been kisses, yes, but each too aware of its own beginning and end. The well of her throat turned to sand. A woman approached with twisted bones. Lillian pressed more coins than she could afford into the topography of her palm. He suggested a return. To what? There was only this, and they rose as one. At the corner of the parque, near the flower vendors, she glanced back to see what they had been. Forgotten buns spilled off the bench, their moment now past. The buns would stay until pigeons or the hungry made them their own. Perhaps others could make a better meal. Herman and Ruby. The bus is full and they have to stand. She rocks down the aisle, grasping the backs of seats as though swimming through a river plugged with vines. The heat squeezes her between moist palms, sears naked legs and arms, the nape of her neck already drenched between flames of hair sprung from a simple band. The bus lurches along serpentine streets, its rhythm sucking her toward the back. A bucket of sloshing water blocks her path. She stops, then, spins and stretches to grab the overhead rails on either side, arms up and open like wings. Right there, facing her, his arms also flared open and up, elbows slightly bent, hands next to hers on the rails. Sweat channels down his cheek, collects in the shallow spoon of his neck. A stranger with brown eyes like silt. The motion of the bus eases them forward and back, 2 underwater plants, forearms and elbows grazing, his face a hummingbird away. On the periphery, an abuela strokes the languid child on her lap. A man slumps forward, skin visible through a wet rag of shirt, a sack of frijoles balanced between bare knees. Schoolgirls in white blouses, tartan skirts, entertain ice cream reveries out windows that will not yield. Every seat taken, each pocket of air swallowed whole. Somewhere near the front, salsa. The heat owns a pulse. Her wisp of dress fuses to the seam of her spine. The extraño sways close. Shoes brush sandals as if preparing to dance. Thighs and shoulders skim. The bus swerves. Tepid water spills across her feet. The straining surrender of tendons. She leans into him with her breasts. Neither speak, smile, nor look away. She counts the individual pearls above his lip, sweat rivulets over collarbones, wrist veins, smacks behind knees. Another curve, a second swell. A child startles awake. An ambulancia sirens past. The city's impatient, but together they are deaf. His hands nudge hers on the rails. Moist fingers crawl over modest hills of knuckles and weave her mouth near the plane of his neck, breath against the pink shell of her ear, lips barely missing. Outside, the market, orange and red blurs of fruit, a man selling comics, women with carts buried beneath melting sweets, everything wavering. A tongue licks up her leg, swirls over the curve of her left calf, shivering sweat. She is a nymph, freshly emerged from the sea's salt, a slip, his thigh between her legs, bracing. She closes around it, tightens, hip bones caress. They ride this way through the barrios. The heat becomes a song growing louder in the distance, a melody she once entered but has forgotten the steps to. Birds swoop from a canopy of green lace, a choir of cicadas and crickets, fronds and ferns unfurling the dark, pungent earth. An amphibious slithering begins around their feet, and the sun slides long fingers in and out of the vertiginous shadows, and moisture gathers on the undersides of leaves, and the heat swells and wildflowers explode, and steam rises from twisted roots under carpeting moss, and she draws this verdancy into her lungs, then exhales the selva over him. No one else then. Only the two of them, arms locked overhead, 1,000 crickets, a few chickens, the sultry heat, pushing, pulling, pushing, and still such a long way to go. You're listening to Season 3, Episode 3 of Something Like Love and I'm Shelley Leedahl, the writer and producer. I create most of the music as well, but the salsa music in this episode, Montuno, Evening Mood, is courtesy of D. Yan K. via Creative Commons. And now you're in for a real treat. The next poem is by my good friend, Victoria, BC writer, professor, and environmentalist Malia Acker. Malia also participated in the Canada-Mexico Writing Photography Exchange, and like Gerardo, Juan Jose, and Andres, she was, and is, part of mi familia. The poem of hers I'm about to share appeared in her book, The Reflecting Pool, published by Peddler Press. Calles de Mérida, a las 3 de la mañana. This is a time of grace, to remember the weaving lights of sepia cars during our hours of night translation. The yellow street lamp's glimmer falls, purifies each wandering dog, every drunk with arms around basket or love, and settles between us like an animal curling for rest. Circle, circle, drop into somewhere spirit knows to be full. A fine dust on all, construction of the new city, splinters, stones and machinery of the dark, amassing every hour. It rebuilds itself to glow like the sun, roomy, 2 names for each one. A raven web of telephone wire connects us. Every word increases until it shines like copper, attentive. It permeates the surface of all things until they flame. We reach, eager for what center we contain. How are you going to walk through this world? It's so easy to misstep.